And this morning, the chiefs of police for San Diego and for National City calling for the state to repeal a new law which decriminalized loitering for sex work.
According to the chiefs, SB357 makes it harder for officers to arrest people for human trafficking. But supporters of the law say it helps reduce harassment and discrimination against certain communities. San Diego Police Chief David Nisleit joining us now to discuss more on this. Chief, thanks so much for coming in. Really appreciate your time. We know that your department was part of this recent sting that led to the arrests of 48 people. Senate Bill 357, though, this was authored by Senator Scott Weiner, who said the previous loitering law resulted in, quote, disproportionate criminalization of trans, black, and brown women and perpetuates violence towards sex workers. Your response to this, and tell us how has this impacted your officers' abilities to investigate sex trafficking?
Well, the bill, well-intentioned, but here's what we're seeing out here. What we're seeing is you have the sex workers out there, a lot of them out there being trafficked against their will. Our way of rescuing somebody is to have that initial contact, to have an officer go up and say, hey, what puts you out on the street? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. We find out a lot of these people are juveniles, they're runaways, they're in a very bad relationship, they're being forced into this business. When this bill was enacted, it took away that ability to contact that. But also, talking about the disparities, there's other ways to look at that and see if you can minimize that disparity. Mm-hmm. But again, how many more victims do we need to have? We rescued a 13-year-old girl. There's no way in heck that she wanted to be out there. She's being trafficked. And so, I've been doing this now for 35 years, and this is getting worse. And this was a very predictable and foreseeable consequence of this bill. Also, this is being complaint-driven. Could you imagine living in this area or having a business in this area? So let's look at this from a balanced perspective of looking at it from the perspective of the person being trafficked, look at it from the perspective of the people that work and live in that area. I mean, it became an open-air sex market, as the district attorney talked about, and I've been out there multiple times on duty, and it's just the nonstop drivers, and then the workers are out there, much like the video shows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know this was all part of the operation that you were on. Many law enforcement agencies taking part in this, arresting about 50 people.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, a lot of the victims, these are victims who are being sex trafficked. I mean, you mentioned a 13-year-old. I remember mentioning a pregnant person who was out there. Transgender people, foster kids become used by these traffickers.
Yes.
San Diego being one of the hot spots, the state having the highest numbers, as we mentioned.
Yes.
So why is this happening? How are these traffickers able to do this to these young people?
Well, they groom people at a very young age, and it's about power, it's about money. And they'll move these victims, if you will, from city to city throughout the state. They'll go into Nevada. It's kind of almost like a circuit, and that's trying to move around to kind of avoid enforcement. But now with this new bill, it's even harder to do that. So it's very difficult to rescue these victims. And then obviously the traffickers work with a high level of impunity to do this business. And so that's why we're seeing it even more boldened. Mm-hmm. I remember being out there on Christmas morning, talking to several of the ladies that were working, and they were very pointed about, hey, you know exactly what I'm doing out here, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so, we have to have a balanced attack. And when we talk about this bill, that's what I'm looking for. That's why I've called for the repeal, is we have to be centric on the victims. And this is leading to more people being trafficked, especially, I'm very concerned about the young women and the impact it has on their life for the rest of their lives. And that's why, again, it needs to be a balanced bill.
This was an issue, though, before SB 357, right? I mean, trafficking's been an issue here for a while. So if it should go away, you do really feel like the officers would have a better chance of saving some of these kids?
Yeah, what we're looking at is changing the behavior. Again, a lot of this complaints, and this, the senator didn't understand, is most of this is being driven by complaints. And so when police, we deal with criminal behavior. Mm-hmm. And somebody out on the street conducting prostitution, that is a criminal act. And so we're going to have those contacts, if you will, but now you've emboldened all sides of this. And so, again, it's about balance. It's about looking at the victims and making certain that we can put an end to this, and making certain that there's not a 13-year-old girl out there. And we're also seeing violence with this. We've recovered guns. There's been beatings. There's been shootings. Yeah. This is all stuff that we can prevent. We just need a more balanced law.
Yeah. Now let's not forget there's also people who are going to that location looking for prostitutes.
Yes.
They are also criminals in all of this.
Yeah. They are. And we need have a better, if you will, a more strict law to kind of prevent those folks coming to this area or any other area looking to buy sex from somebody.
Yeah, well, 48 are off the streets now after this really successful operation.
Yes, absolutely.
Your department and others got together for that big operation.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chief, for coming in here. We do want to tell you that there are resources for people impacted by human trafficking. You can call the national hotline at 1-888-373-7888. We want to thank Chief Nisleit again for coming out. And by the way, we reached out to State Senator Scott Weiner's office yesterday for comment on the Chief's concerns over SB 357 bill. We have not yet heard back on that. Thanks again for coming in, Chief.
Thank you.